Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. In today's video, we begin a journey through one of the most remarkable stories ever told. The complete story of Apostle Paul, explained like never before. Picture this for a moment. A man who once breathed threats against the earliest followers of Jesus. A man feared by Christians everywhere, suddenly becoming one of the greatest voices of the faith he tried to destroy. How does such a dramatic transformation happen? How does a persecutor of believers turn into an apostle whose letters would shape the New Testament and echo through history? That is the mystery we are about to uncover. When we talk about the life of Apostle Paul, we're not just talking about a biography of an ancient figure. We're talking about a story full of twists, betrayals, miracles, journeys across empires, and moments of breathtaking courage. Paul's story is at the very heart of Christianity's expansion, yet it begins in the most unexpected way. He wasn't born among the disciples who walked with Jesus in Galilee. He didn't sit by the lakeside when Jesus spoke parables to the crowds. In fact, when Jesus' followers were preaching the good news after the resurrection, Paul, known then as Saul, was determined to silence them. And he was very good at it. But life has a way of changing when you least expect it. Imagine riding on the dusty road to Damascus, with anger in your heart and authority in your hands to arrest believers. Suddenly, a light blazes from heaven, brighter than the noonday sun, and a voice calls out your name, not in judgment, but in love. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? That moment would not just stop him in his tracks. It would shatter everything he thought he knew about God, about truth, and about himself. Before we get there, though, we need to step back and see who Saul really was. Born in Tarsus, raised as both a Jew and a Roman citizen, trained under some of the most respected teachers of the law, he was a man of intelligence, privilege, and fierce conviction. To him, following the law of Moses with absolute zeal was the highest calling, and anyone who threatened that, like the followers of Jesus, was a danger that had to be eliminated. His determination was so strong that early Christians feared even the mention of his name. To them, Saul was a hunter, a man whose presence brought terror. And yet, hidden within this fierce enemy of the church was a destiny no one could have imagined. Saul's sharp mind, his fiery passion, and his Roman citizenship would all be used in ways far greater than he could ever plan. But the path to transformation wasn't easy. It involved blinding light, years of preparation, journeys filled with danger, imprisonment, rejection, and even betrayal by those he thought were friends. So as we step into this story, prepare yourself. The life of Apostle Paul is not a quiet tale. It's a dramatic unfolding of grace, power, and mystery. From the streets of Jerusalem to the bustling marketplaces of Corinth, from shipwrecks in the Mediterranean to letters written in Roman prisons, every chapter of his life carries both tension and hope. And at the center of it all is a single question. How can one man's life turn the world upside down? Stay with me, because in this video we are only beginning the journey. The moment on the road to Damascus will change everything, but what happens after will surprise you even more. Because Paul's story is not just about the past. It's about how faith can transform a life, no matter how broken, no matter how unlikely. And before this story is over, you might just find that Paul's journey speaks directly into your own. Saul's world was not small. He grew up in Tarsus, a city known for trade, culture, and education. It was a place where Greek philosophy, Roman power, and Jewish tradition all met on crowded streets. From a young age, Saul carried two identities. On one hand, he was a Jew of Jews, circumcised on the 8th day, born into the tribe of Benjamin, raised in the traditions of his fathers. On the other, he was a Roman citizen, which gave him privileges that many Jews could only dream of. This unique combination would later open doors for him to travel across the Roman Empire. But at this point in his life, it only added to his confidence. He saw himself as chosen, as someone with authority, and he used that authority with determination. Under the famous teacher Gamaliel, Saul studied the law with passion. He was brilliant, disciplined, and relentless in his pursuit of religious purity. For him, God's honor had to be defended at any cost. That's why the growing movement of Christians disturbed him so deeply. These followers of Jesus of Nazareth claimed that the crucified carpenter was the Messiah. To Saul, this was not only foolish, it was blasphemous. The cross was a symbol of shame, reserved for criminals and rebels. How could anyone believe that the Holy One of Israel had chosen such a path? To Saul, it was a dangerous lie, and he believed it was his mission to stop it. The book of Acts describes how Saul approved of the stoning of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. Imagine the scene. The crowd's anger boiling over, stones flying, and in the middle of it all, Saul standing by, holding the cloaks of those doing the killing. He didn't see this as cruelty, he saw it as justice. Every act of violence against the followers of Jesus, in his eyes, was a victory for God. And so his name began to spread in whispers and in fear. Christians hid when they heard Saul was near, because they knew what he carried. Authority from the high priests to arrest, to chain, and to drag men and women alike back to Jerusalem for punishment. But here is where the tension grows. Saul's devotion to destroying the church was matched only by the church's determination to survive. The more persecution spread, the more the message of Jesus seemed to spread with it. No matter how many followers were scattered, beaten, or arrested, the story of the resurrection refused to die. Saul couldn't understand it. Why would ordinary people risk everything, their homes, their families, even their lives, for this crucified man? What power did this message hold that fear could not silence? The deeper Saul pressed into his mission, the closer he came to the very truth he was trying to erase. And though he could not see it yet, every step, every order, and every journey was leading him closer to a moment that would break everything open. The hunter was walking straight into the path of the one he hunted. Saul's conflict was not just with the Christians he hunted, it was with the very foundations of belief itself. He thought he was fighting for God, but in reality, he was fighting against something much larger than he understood. To the early church, Saul was a nightmare they couldn't escape. Imagine being part of a small community, gathering quietly in homes, whispering prayers in fear, always wondering if this man would appear at the door with soldiers behind him. For many, his name was almost as frightening as Rome itself, and yet from Saul's perspective, he believed he was defending the truth. He saw the followers of Jesus as rebels, not only against the law of Moses, but against the order God had set in place. This is what makes his story so gripping. Both sides believed they were standing for truth. On one hand, you had Christians, carrying the message of the risen Christ, telling stories of miracles and transformed lives. On the other, you had Saul, armed with tradition, authority, and conviction, determined to erase those very stories before they could spread any further. The conflict wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, cultural, and deeply personal. Every arrest, every confrontation pulled the tension tighter, as if the world itself was holding its breath to see which side would break first. And yet, the more Saul tried to crush the church, the more it seemed to grow. It spread into Samaria, into Damascus, into places Saul himself would soon chase after. The harder he pressed, the more unstoppable it became. It was as if the very resistance he brought only added fuel to the fire. And without realizing it, Saul was not only fueling the spread of the gospel, He was walking straight into the moment when his own world would shatter. The journey to Damascus was supposed to be Saul's triumph. He carried letters from the high priest himself, written proof of his authority, a mission backed by the full weight of Jerusalem's leaders. To him, this was not just another assignment, it was a chance to strike at the heart of the Christian movement. Damascus was a crossroads city, full of trade routes and travelers. If the message of Jesus took root there, it could spread across the empire like wildfire. Saul was determined to cut it off before it reached too far. Imagine the intensity of that road. The dust rising beneath the hooves, the clinking of weapons at his side, and the men around him following his command. Every mile brought him closer to the believers hiding in Damascus, men and women already whispering prayers for protection. The air was heavy with tension, as if two unseen forces were on a collision course, and Saul was right in the middle. He didn't know it yet, but each step was carrying him toward a moment that would not only decide his fate, but change the future of Christianity itself. To those Christians in Damascus, the news of Saul's approach was terrifying. Word traveled fast, and many were asking the same question. How do you stand against a man so powerful, so relentless, and so certain he is right? They didn't know that even Saul himself was beginning to feel the weight of something pressing against him, though he couldn't explain it. His anger burned, but beneath it there was a restlessness, a stirring he tried to ignore. Still, he pushed forward. The city was near, the mission was clear, and nothing, not fear, not doubt, not even the whisper of conscience, would stop him now. Or so he thought. Just when it seemed the road to Damascus was leading Saul straight toward his greatest victory, another thread in the story began to unfold quietly, almost in secret. In the very city Saul was determined to invade, a believer named Ananias was living in constant fear. He had heard the rumors, the warnings whispered from house to house. Saul of Tarsus was on his way. To the Christians in Damascus, Saul wasn't just an enemy. He was the storm on the horizon, coming closer every day. Families prayed in silence. Homes were guarded in secrecy, and every knock at the door felt like it could be the last. The tension grew heavier, not just for Saul, but for the ones who would soon face him. Yet the surprise was that the conflict wasn't only external. Inside Saul himself, something unseen was stirring. The fire that once burned so clearly with anger was beginning to flicker in strange ways. He told himself it was determination, that he was simply tired from the long journey, but deep inside, a question was starting to rise. One he couldn't silence. What if he was wrong? What if these people weren't traitors, but truly followers of the one God had sent? He didn't dare say it aloud, not even to himself. But the thought was there, gnawing at him with every step closer to Damascus. At the same time, the believers in the city wrestled with their own fears. Some wanted to flee before Saul arrived, abandoning everything to protect their lives. Others felt called to stay, no matter the cost, trusting that God would protect them. This division created tension within their small community. What if staying meant capture? What if leaving meant abandoning their faith? Their prayers became desperate, their voices trembling in the night as they asked God to intervene in ways they couldn't imagine. And so, two stories moved toward one another. Saul, burning with a mission of destruction, and the Christians of Damascus, trembling but unyielding in their devotion. Neither side knew what was about to happen. The collision was coming, and it would be unlike anything either had prepared for. The hunter was closer than ever. The hunted were praying harder than ever, and above them, both a power, greater than fear, greater than anger, was preparing to break into the story in a way that would shock the world. The road to Damascus reached its breaking point under the blaze of a midday sun. Saul rode with authority and confidence, the letters of the high priest secure in his hand, when suddenly the world itself seemed to crack open. A light, brighter than lightning and fiercer than the sun, exploded around him. It was so overwhelming that he fell to the ground, shielding his eyes in terror. The men traveling with him froze, stunned and speechless, as the air filled with a voice that shook Saul to the core. "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" The words pierced deeper than any sword, cutting through the certainty that had driven him for years. Trembling, Saul could barely speak. "Who are you, Lord?" he whispered. The answer shattered everything he thought he knew. "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." In that moment, Saul's mission ended in ashes. The persecutor became the broken one, the hunter undone by the voice of the very man he believed was dead. The light blinded him, stripping away every ounce of power, and leaving him helpless on the ground. His companions had to lift him by the hand and lead him into Damascus, the very city he thought he would enter in triumph. Instead of chains for others, Saul himself entered bound by weakness, unable to see, unsure of who he was, and haunted by the voice that echoed in his mind. Meanwhile, in Damascus, Ananias, the believer who had prayed desperately for protection, was given a vision he could hardly believe. God told him to go to Saul, the very man he feared most, and lay hands on him so his sight could be restored. The twist was almost unbearable. How could he, a faithful follower, be asked to help the enemy who had caused so much suffering? And yet, Ananias obeyed. When he stood before Saul, he did not call him enemy. He called him brother. In that moment, the greatest persecutor of the church received both forgiveness and sight, his eyes opening not just to the world around him, but to a new mission that would carry the name of Jesus to nations far beyond Jerusalem. But here was the unexpected turn. Saul's transformation did not erase the danger. His former allies, the very leaders who had empowered him, soon turned against him. The hunter had become the hunted, and the city he thought he would conquer became the first place he would have to escape by night, lowered in a basket through the city walls. The story of Paul had only just begun, and already it was clear. His journey would be as dangerous as it was world-changing. Paul's escape from Damascus marked the beginning of a completely different journey. The man who once rode in with authority and pride now had to be lowered in secret, slipping through the city walls under the cover of night. The irony was impossible to miss. Saul of Tarsus, once feared by believers everywhere, was now running for his life because of the very name he once tried to erase. But this was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of a mission that would carry the gospel to the farthest corners of the Roman Empire. In Jerusalem, Paul faced another struggle. The Christians there didn't trust him, and how could they? Only days before, his name brought fear and grief. Now he claimed to be one of them, a follower of Jesus. It took time and the courage of men like Barnabas to bridge that gap. Barnabas stood before the apostles and spoke on Paul's behalf, telling them of the vision on the Damascus road, of the bold preaching that had already begun. Slowly, suspicion gave way to acceptance, and the church began to see that the man who once persecuted them was now called to strengthen them. Paul's mission became clear. He was chosen to carry the message of Jesus not only to the Jews, but to the Gentiles, to kings, and to nations that had never heard the good news. His Roman citizenship would open doors no ordinary preacher could enter. His training in the law would give him the wisdom to explain the scriptures in ways that connected the old with the new. His passion, once used to destroy, would now be used to build. And yet, the road ahead would not be easy. Persecution, prison, rejection, and hardship would follow him to the end of his days. But through it all, Paul's story offers one powerful truth. No one is beyond transformation. The same man who approved of Stephen's death would go on to write words of love, grace, and hope that still speak today. The hunter became the messenger. The enemy became a brother. The persecutor became the apostle. As we close this story, let us remember that the life of Apostle Paul is not just history. It is a living testimony of how faith can turn the world upside down. From the road to Damascus to the ends of the earth, Paul's journey reminds us that no heart is too hard, no past too heavy, and no person too far gone for the light of God's grace to break through. And that, perhaps, is the greatest story of all.